All right, so our topic today is managing seasonal workers. How do we manage an influx of a whole bunch of new people into our organization in a hurry? We go from winter to springtime quickly in the state of Utah, and many of our operations out there have to bring on a significant number, maybe even many times the off-season total of the employees that work there during the summer months. And that can put some serious risks on our organization. So we think this is an important topic and want to spend a little bit of time on it. I want to start out with a poll. So let me hit escape here, and I'm going to launch this poll. And if you would, take a second to go in and type your responses on these various questions that we have. Just 3 questions. Number 1. What's your seasonal? This is more of a curiosity, and I thought a lot of you might have that that same curiosity. What's the starting pay for a seasonal worker? You bring somebody on to work as a parks worker or mosquito abatement or weed department, spraying weeds on the side of the road, whatever it may be. Where are we starting those seasonal workers at? What's their pay? And I think this will be an interesting. I'm seeing it's looking really interesting. Second question, if you've got to it, is do you utilize a temp agency to provide some of these seasonal workers? I'll talk a little bit more about that throughout the course of the presentation. And third question, do you hire 14 to 17-year-old seasonal workers? Any of those workers that are under 18? Oh, I should have put another one in there and asked, does anybody hire anybody under 14 years old? All right, looks like we are 74% complete, and it doesn't look like we're moving a whole lot, so I'm going to close the poll. And now you should be able to see that. I can't see it. All right. So what's the starting wage? Only 6% are paying minimum wage for these types of jobs. 17% are $8 to $9 per hour. 23% are in that $10 to $11 per hour, and 29% are starting seasonal workers over $12 per hour. What do you think about that, Doug? Brent? Surprising or not?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. No, it doesn't surprise me, but it is kind of interesting. You know, I've had some conversations and heard some, people complaining about, what some of our public employees are paid. And it's kind of an interesting commentary because, there's this perception out there in the public that, these kind of jobs should be minimum wage or near minimum wage jobs. And the reality is we live in a labor market that is tight. It's hard to find people to work for you these days, and you don't get the employees you need paying minimum wage. And so there's a real disparity out there, I think, in between the public perception of what some of our public employees should be making and what it actually takes to keep those employees or get those employees that we need.
Yeah, absolutely my thoughts, Doug. As I'm around talking with people, people are trying to ramp up and hire people for the summer, and they're having some serious difficulties just getting warm bodies, let alone good quality employees to do this. And so I intentionally put that question in there, 1, out of curiosity, but 2, to illustrate that point that it's a different labor market than we've had in previous years. All right, how about utilizing a temp agency to provide some of these workers? 29% said yes, 43% said no, 3% said not sure. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the presentation, but it might be an option for you to be able to make some of these hires that we've had a hard time doing in the past. And then the last question, do you hire 14 to 17-year-old seasonal workers? 31% said yes, 43% said no. Okay, interesting. Let's see, I closed that poll. All right, tell me, Doug, is that did my screen come back up? on the presentation? Or is the poll
It
still
says
showing?
poll.
Still says poll?
Yeah.
Still?
Yes.
All right.
There you go.
Did it work now?
3.9.
Okay. So here's the question. Get your fingers ready to type into the chat box. What does the number 3.9 mean? This is a number that came out this last week. And an acid. 3.9. Unemployment, Stephanie. All right, very good. And Brent got it as well. And yeah. All right. So 3.9 is the national unemployment rate. That's the lowest it's been since the year 2000. That's a really low unemployment rate. What is it in the state of Utah? Well, I checked this morning. It's 3.1%. What does that indicate? I picked on Doug on the first one. Brent, what do you think a 3.1% unemployment rate tells us?
Tells us that we're doing pretty good. It's
pretty good, unless we're trying to hire. And Deb says it means not enough workers, and that's really the truth. We say, well, we got 3.1%. By the time we get down to those low numbers, we're really getting to the point where we're at full employment, where that 3.1% in the state of Utah, there's a certain percentage of those people who can't or won't work, and it's going to be really hard to fill those positions. Okay, some say we've stopped trying. Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. And so as we talk about seasonal workers, that can be even more of a challenge. In the past, we've relied significantly on college students, high school students, people that are kind of doing other types of seasonal workers. Maybe around the ski resorts, you've got people that work at the ski resort because they're ski bums and they want to be there for the winter, and then they need a job for the summer. And so those have been kind of the labor markets that we've worked with, and now it's gotten really difficult. Had one manager recently tell me that one of their major concerns, or one of the things that they think has been a challenge with them, was the change in the mission age for LDS missionaries, where the LDS Church changed the young men's mission age from 19 to 18, and so this manager said, yeah, we're just not able to hire that group of people because they don't hang around for the summer after they graduate from high school, and we've just lost that group of workers. Anyway, so there's all kinds of challenges that go into our hiring right now. And we'll just throw a few more monkey wrenches into that as we talk about managing seasonal workers. Seasonal workers are riskier workers. And you may ask yourself, well, why? What's more risky about them? It really comes down to, we don't have a lot of time to train them. They're new on the job, and they don't have a lot of experience with what we do, and so in just a short amount of time, we can hurt a number of them. Here are a number of things that we're going to talk about their experience, talk about training, supervision, and also child labor laws. It throws another big monkey wrench in. Here's a graph that shows the demographics of people when they have a workers' compensation, the age that they are when they have a workers' compensation claim, when they get injured. And what you can see is we have a pretty steady downward trend after the first 4 years, 1 to 4 years of employment. But if you look closely at the graph, that first year in a worker's career, when they're hired, that first year, they have many times the risk of being injured, because that first bar is only 1 year. So between that and that first 4 years, new employees are riskier and more at risk of being injured on the job. So even to the tune of being, if you've been with the organization 15 to 24 years there, you're about a dozen times more likely to be injured if you're a new employee than those people that have been there for a couple of decades. Okay. So we know it's a risky group. We have options of the people that we hire. We already talked about a few of those groups. Volunteers are an important group. Many of us wouldn't be able to do our work if we didn't have volunteers. And I think somebody said that that they gave up and they're just taking volunteers for this. Volunteers are a great option for us, but they can't do everything. Adults are out there. Youth are also another option. We'll talk about child labor and what we can have those young workers do. And then temp agencies. Whoops, let me go back to, let's see. Did I get that right? There we go. So what about temp agencies? Several of our members have had this challenge of hiring employees and having challenges with them. What happens if you don't get a good one? Well, we hired them. That's going to be a process to fire them or whatever it is to discipline them. And sometimes we have this higher instant rate as well. And so some of our members have decided, you know what? We're just going to hire our employees, our seasonal employees, through a temp agency. And then if we don't like them, we can just call the temp agency up and say, hey, don't send them back. We don't think they're really cutting it. They don't do the job. They don't show up on time, whatever it is. And we can end that arrangement really quickly because they're a temp. And they go into it knowing that. The other side of that is a temp agency takes on the workers' compensation risk. So we have this higher rate of injury that happens in these first-year employees, and seasonal workers are even more risky than that. The temp agency takes on the risk. So let's allow the temp agency to own that risk, and it'll help us control our EMOD and keep those workers out there, keep workers on the job in the event that somebody does become injured. That doesn't lessen our responsibility to provide a safe workplace and train employees and all of that, but this is simply a management tool that we might be able to use. All right. As we look at volunteers and seasonal employees, they bring risk with them. Because of their experience level, because of who they are. Sometimes we may hire young workers who don't have a great level of experience. Their decision-making capabilities may not be as good as somebody who's been around the block a little bit. We might have more problems with them. There's greater risk in both liability as well as workers' comp. I think all of us understand the workers' comp side of things. But what about liability? These volunteers and seasonal workers are representing our organization, and they may come into this with limited experience as far as harassment and discrimination, getting along with people, and if they're out there they're wearing the shirt, they're wearing the hat, they're representing our organization, and so it does provide a risk to our organization. All right. Youthful judgment. That's a nice way to put it. When I have a talk with my kids, you did what? What was going through your mind? Well, not a whole lot when you're in those teenage years. Our decision-making capabilities may not be as good as they are after we've had a little more experience. So let's go. We've got all these things we're going to talk about. First of all, let's talk supervision. Supervision is essential, and we're seeing more and more problems where after something bad has happened, if we get sued, the plaintiff attorney is going to come in and they're going to look at our supervisors and say, do you have any problem supervisors? Did the supervisor of the employees where this bad thing happened, did this supervisor have any problems? Have you disciplined that supervisor? Anyway, we need to look at our supervision and ensure that we have good supervisors. What's the big risk with seasonal workers and volunteers? A lot of times we're throwing supervisors into a really difficult situation that they may not be prepared for. they may be a new employee themselves, and we say, hey, you were here first, so you get to be the supervisor. And we put them into a situation where they just might fail. And so our supervisors, we need to work very carefully with them to ensure that they're trained, that they know what their responsibilities are, and that they make good choices. We may hire supervisors that have youthful judgment issues. So we've got to supervise them more. We've got to look at the number of people that our supervisors could supervise on an average day. They've done a lot of studies there on the span of control, and people can really manage between 3 and 7 employees efficiently, but we shouldn't really go beyond 5 people. And we also want to look at the experience of the supervisor. If they're not experienced, or if they have challenges, let's not throw them to the wolves by giving them 10 employees to manage and supervise and deal with all of their challenges and problems. Let's give them an opportunity to succeed by training them and giving them the tools that they need, and then working with them and paying attention. I already jumped the gun on the temp agencies just a little bit. Volunteers are a great option for us because they provide us with some experience and expertise that we may not be able to pay for. Sometimes we'll have people in our communities that are retired, or they just want to give back to the community, and they may be a powerhouse when it comes to their skills and their experience and background, and that is a resource that we definitely want to utilize. But it does bring with it some risks. These guys don't cost us any money. Basically, we're not paying them wages. We may give them a T-shirt and provide them some benefits, a library card or whatever it may be, for helping us out there. But they do bring with them some risks. They represent our entity and have some potential liabilities. So we want to handle them very similar to hiring a new employee. And just a sideline on that, when we bring volunteers into our organization, there are some things that we have to do to ensure that they have coverage under workers' compensation. Number one, they need to be approved. They need to be listed on a roster. So your chief executive or his or her designate needs to keep a list of the approved volunteers. That is a key part of having that workers' compensation coverage. In the state of Utah, it's a great thing that we have work comp coverage for volunteers, but we've got to follow the rules to make sure it's covered. Just a couple of caveats on that. Work comp is medical only for volunteers in most cases. Public safety has some situations where they can have the indemnity side of it and receive lost wages if they're injured on the job. But most volunteers, it's only going to cover medical coverage, and so we have to think about that. Let's see. It's preferable to cover these volunteers under workers' compensation versus liability, and that's really because of the statutory nature of workers' comp. We can really control those costs because it's listed in the law how those are to be controlled. If it ends up being a liability claim, then we don't have that same control. Okay. We want to look at which positions we designate for volunteers, and then when we bring people on, we want to do similar to a hiring process. Now, we may not be able to be quite as picky on our volunteers, but we still want to be picky. We want to look at their experience, look at their availability and ability. Can they do the job? Let's not put somebody in a situation where they could fail. So let's look at their skills and their physical capabilities to be able to do that job, their background. We also want to look at their background. Certain positions put people in an area where they have access to minors or vulnerable populations, or maybe they're dealing with money. And anytime we're in that type of position, we may be looking at a background check, criminal and otherwise. So we should always gather information from our volunteers, just like a new hire. have them fill out an application or a memorandum of understanding, so we have their contact information. We have an emergency contact. If they were to get injured or come up missing, we need to be able to contact next of kin and be able to get information from them or to them. I would look at references for those populations where they may have access to those vulnerable populations. Background checks. We have an entire webinar on doing criminal background or criminal and other background checks, and there are some laws that we have to stay within the bounds of when we're doing those background checks. So make sure you check into that. We don't have the time today to really go into the depth there, but when we have volunteers or workers that are going to be working with minors, maybe in a coaching and athletics position, referees, or people working with seniors, people working with money, we probably want to put them into a background check area. Sex offender check as well, and there's some easy ways that we can go about doing that. But once again, make sure you check out that other webinar on background checks, because there are some potential legal pitfalls if we don't do these right. Okay. And just a reminder, folks, if you have questions, type those into the chat box as we go, and I'll answer those throughout the course of the presentation. We want to, let me go back, let's see. We want to, whether it's a volunteer or a new hire, we want to ensure that they know what their job is. Have a job description that says, here's what your duties are, here are what your expectations are, here's who your supervisor is. If you have a question or a concern, here's who you can talk to. Communication goes a long way if we do that early on. We want to do some orientation and training. Here's how we do it. Whether it's a volunteer or a worker, we want to have them know what the rules are and not have to be corrected on, oh no, you can't do it that way. Let's do that up front. They will feel much better about their job, and you will feel much better about putting them out to do that duty. What should happen in that orientation? Well, safety, of course, should be the number one topic, but your regular policies and procedures. Here's how we do it. This is what we expect from you. This is what you should expect from us. We should identify any hazards on the job that this worker may face. And in addition to that, train them on the safety subjects. Provide them with the personal protective equipment they might need, whether that's earplugs or safety glasses or maybe nothing. Depending on their task, they may or may not have personal protective equipment. They may or may not have to have some detailed training on certain tasks. We also want to talk to them about harassment and discrimination prevention. A lot of times we hire young workers for these summer positions, and they may not have ever gone through a training on harassment and discrimination prevention, and kids that have just gotten out of high school or maybe still in high school have a different perception of what's appropriate interaction between people and what may not be. In addition to that, proper supervision, tell them who their supervisor is, and let them know. All right, now we're talking about child labor. Oh, but before I go into this, I got to have here's the quiz, and this quiz will be good for a cup of peanut M&Ms when you're at the annual meeting next time, or the next time that you're at the trust. Who can name one, the movie that this person on the slide was in, and two, what was her name? Oh, wow. Okay, Megan got The Sandlot. She got the movie right. Quick on the draw. What was her name? Looking at Doug. He's thinking. He's thinking hard. Cecilia's getting close. Oh, that was a close one. I got to go with Stephen Richardson. The Sandlot. Wendy Peppercorn. All right. Oh, there we've got a bunch. Everybody remembers Wendy. All right. She was a seasonal worker, you see. All right. So we want to talk about child labor. As we did our poll earlier, we had a fairly significant number of you who hire workers who are under 18 years of age. And I'm going to there's really not there's a distinction between volunteers and not, but I would not make that distinction. If I'm bringing a volunteer on, I would not have them do a task that I couldn't pay them to do because of the limitations of the child labor laws. I would look at that and say, what could I have this 15-year-old do under child labor laws? And even though they're volunteering, I wouldn't have them do something that goes beyond that, because that's kind of the precedence that we're going to be looking at. So there are two distinct groups that we'll be looking at: 14 and 15-year-olds and 16 and 17-year-olds. There are a number of rules and requirements around this, when they can and can't work, and the work conditions that they can work under, the type of dangerous work that they can do, even up to and including driving, and including golf carts. So we'll go through this in some detail, but think about that. How many of you out there hire? How many of you hire 14 and 15-year-olds? Because it's a different group. Brent says he's surprised that people got Wendy Peppercorn. I'm not. I am not. All right. So we have a couple of different laws that apply, state and federal law. We're always going to default to the more stringent of those two laws. So in most cases, we follow the Fair Labor Standards Act that's at a federal level. There are specifics to the state of Utah, and we'll talk about a couple of those as we go through the presentation. So we have these two groups. 14 and 15-year-olds have very significant restrictions on what they can do. 16 and 17-year-olds can do a lot more, but it's not free game to have them do anything that's out there. When we're talking child labor laws, what is the most common word that we use? This is a tough one. Here's the most common word we use: no. This time of year, we tend to get a lot of questions about this. Can I hire a 15-year-old to do blasting at our mine? No, you can't do that. Can I hire somebody to do this or that based on their age? So we end up saying no quite a bit when it comes to this. So just get prepared, because the rules are very restricted. Okay, wage. How much can I pay or how little can I pay a child labor, right? Anybody under 18, and actually it's listed as anybody under the age of 20 in the law. We can have a training wage. The first 90 calendar days of their work, we can actually pay them a lot less than minimum wage. We can pay them $4.25 an hour. Are we going to do this? Well, I think our polls showed us that we're not going to do this, because we're not going to end up being able to hire anybody if we say, well, you're going to work 90 calendar days, which is basically the entire summer, at $4.25. So even though the law says yes, we can do this, I would dare say that minimum wage is going to be the very rock bottom where we're going to start paying these folks. Maybe in some of the outlying areas, if you don't have a lot of competition for jobs, you may be able to do that, but if not. All right, after 90 days, then you go to regular minimum wage for your minimum pay, but it looked like the majority of us are paying more, if not significantly more, than minimum wage. Hours of work. 14 and 15-year-olds can't work during school hours. So we can't say, well, just take a couple hours off of class and do your job. We can't have them work before 7 a.m. or after 7 p.m. during school hours, or during the school time of year. From June through Labor Day, they can work to 9 p.m. This is one of those subtle differences. Utah says 9:30, but we're always going to default to always default to the more stringent. So we can't have them working past 9 p.m. for those 14 and 15-year-olds. They can't work more than 3 hours per day on a school day. They can't work more than 8 hours on a non-school day. So very restricted for 14 and 15-year-olds. So Saturday, we could have them work up to 8 hours, but they can't go beyond that. They can't work more in aggregate than 18 hours per school week, or 40 hours during non-school week. So during during the summertime, we can work them 40 hours, but we can't have any overtime. All right. There are a few exceptions for child labor if they have graduated from high school. 14 and 15-year-olds in most cases are not going to be there, but some of our 16 and 17-year-olds may have been there. They may have graduated from high school. They may be excused from compulsory attendance to school. They might have a child. They might be married. There are a couple of exemptions on this, that if they have a child to support, or if they're married, there are some exemptions that will allow them to work because they need to be able to provide for their family. If they're permanently expelled from school, they can get a job and go to work. All right, 16 and 17-year-olds. There's really not limitations on the hours that they work. Their limitations are more based upon the type of work that they can do. All right. So child labor. We look at here's some requirements for child labor. We have to provide them breaks, as well as a meal break. So they need to have a 30-minute meal break at or before 5 hours of work. They need to have a 10-minute break, just some time to themselves, for each 3 hours worked. So basically, that's going to work out. Most will have, you work 2 hours, take a 10-minute break, 2 more hours, take your lunch break, work 2 hours, take your break, and then finish out the rest of your day. Is generally how that works. This is a requirement for those child workers. Requirements may be a lot less stringent for adults. All right. So here comes the no section. Dangerous occupations for 14 and 15-year-olds. This is a really restricted. Anything involving manufacturing, mining, processing, anything that the Secretary of Labor identifies as a dangerous occupation. Hoisting apparatus like a crane or a hoist in a auto shop. Boiler or engine rooms, maintenance or repair of machinery or equipment, operation of motor vehicles. Well, obviously, we don't want our 14 and 15-year-olds out there driving. A driver's helper. So maybe somebody that's going along doing delivery. This is something that we can't have them do. Riding on the outside of the vehicle. I would like to make this an overall ban for not just youth workers, but all workers. We've had some really serious situations when it comes to people riding in the back of pickups or riding on trailers. So let's try to eliminate these tasks altogether. Window washers, if they're working at elevated conditions, if they can do it from a ground level, they're not climbing ladders or things like that, they can wash windows. But if they have to work in an elevated area, they could not do that task. Some more dangerous occupations. Any power-driven machine. So anything that has a motor on it, an engine on it, including lawnmowers, golf carts, ATVs, trimmers, cutters, weed eaters, edgers, all of those things fall into power-driven equipment. So 14, 15-year-olds cannot do that. Another list. This is a pretty extensive list. Ladder work, anything at height, scaffolding at height. Baking and cooking, so big mixers or dough presses or things like that. Freezers, coolers, peddling. We can't send them out with the newspapers, peddling newspapers on the street. Loading and unloading vehicles, catching and cooping of poultry. Now this is a good one. I actually found a picture of myself. I was involved in catching and cooping of poultry before I was 14 years old. I found a picture of it. Check this out. Here I was when I was young. I don't know if anybody got that one or not, but you got to throw something in there. I actually did that, catching and cooping of poultry, and it was far worse than the Napoleon Dynamite. Oh, so Debbie brings up again, what about other livestock? I forgot to mention, there are exemptions for farm labor. There are many exemptions there that will allow us to do this. For whatever reason, catching and cooping of poultry is definitely on the list, and it is a miserable job. So I can understand why that happens, and those chickens do have large talons. Messenger service, communications, public utilities, construction. So like I said, very, very restricted when it comes to 14 and 15-year-olds. All right, 16 and 17 is probably the category that everybody is most worried about. We can't have 16 and 17-year-olds playing with explosives or working with explosives or mining or being lumberjacks. Here's one that most of you go, yeah, big deal. I'm not worried about that stuff. Powered woodworking equipment, circular saws, chainsaws, bandsaws, powered metal forming equipment. This is going to affect a lot of our outdoor work in parks, tree trimming, things like that. If they're using powered equipment like that, saws and the such, those 16 and 17-year-olds are specifically precluded from doing that type of work. Here's a few others. Guillotine shears. Anybody ever seen a guillotine shear? I've used those in my career as well. Wood chippers, cutting discs like on a grinder, wrecking, demolition, ship breaking, roofing, excavation. Can't have these guys in a trench. All right, here's one that's going to get a little stickier. No driving of motor vehicles for 16 years old. 17-year-old may drive with the following caveats. They need to be 17 years old. They need to be licensed for the type of vehicle that they're driving. So in most cases, they're just driving a light truck or a car. Their standard driver's license is licensed for that. They need to have completed a state-approved driver education course. They cannot have any moving violations on their record. How do you get them? How do you know whether they got moving violations? Well, you need to send us their driver's license number, and we will include them on your monthly MVR report, motor vehicle records report. Now, what if you have somebody that you're hiring right now? Well, their job is they're going to be driving here, at least on a limited extent. How do I make sure I don't have a violation on there? Well, give us a call, and Jill, in specific here at the trust, can look and verify that they don't have those violations on their records. Their vehicles cannot exceed 6,000 pounds. So most of our regular cars and trucks, until we get into those heavier vehicles, will be in that category. But by the time you get into a 3/4 ton truck or larger, we're probably at that 6,000 pounds. They need to wear seat belts for driver and passenger. They need to have instruction on how to use that. And then this driving needs to be incidental to their job. So it could be they get in a pickup, they drive to the park, and they work the majority of the day at the park, or they're going to a couple of different parks and they're just driving from one to another. It cannot be the primary part of their job. They can't be a driver, they can't be a delivery person, they can't be a meter reader or something that driving is really the primary task that they would be doing. Okay. Before I go to this next slide, I had a question here. What is youth peddling? It's basically selling stuff, going door to door, going out on the side of the street and selling newspapers or things like that. And yet, all the kids in my neighborhood come to my door trying to sell stuff from their fundraisers. I think I'm going to say, I'm sorry, this is breaking this is breaking our child labor laws. All right, so driving restrictions. Even though we can let them drive, they met all of those things, we can't exceed 1/3 of their work day driving. And that's in one given day. If we go to, we have to look at that on a weekly basis, and they can't exceed 1/5 of their hours worked during the week driving. They can't tow anything. The vehicles have to be less than 6,000 pounds, no motorcycles, no ATVs, no golf carts, specifically called out in the regulation. So what would you say about golf carts? That's going to be a major impact on many of our golf courses that are out there. Let's see. I'm seeing a question. So you can use volunteer use to collect food waste to a composting facility. Ooh, Doug, think about that one. Brent, think about that one. Food waste to a composting facility. They would use bicycles to. So they're going out in the community, collecting that on a bicycle. I'm gonna let Doug and Brent think.
With a trailer, or
we'll get some information. Deb can add that in, and then we'll. That one could be, because of the type of facility that they're bringing it to, it may push them over the limit. But let's see. It says going out on a subscription type basis to collect food waste from homes. They have a small trailer behind them on their bicycles. I'll let Doug think about that one for a second. Maybe he's ready to answer.
I'm not aware of any regulations that address bicycles specifically when it comes to driving.
Yeah, I think the bicycle is fine. The question I would have would be, because it's going to a solid waste facility, whether that with the type of equipment and operation there, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Think about that one a little bit. And just on that point, you can call the Labor Commission and ask specific questions. If you want to call us, we'll get a question like this. Sometimes we have to scratch our head for a few minutes and think whether it's there. And if you don't want to call the Labor Commission and you've got a real challenging question, call us and maybe we can call the Labor Commission and get the information. So on this, they can't do route deliveries, no route sales, transportation for hire. None of this stuff can be part of a 17-year-old. No time-sensitive deliveries, no more than 3 passengers in the vehicle. And then, of course, we have to look at, let's see, everybody, we also have the other challenge on that. This is not a child labor thing, but we have the driver's license law in the state of Utah that says they have to, they can only go, or they can only haul siblings with them, take siblings with them for 6 months after getting their license. We could have a 17-year-old that gets their license late and could fall into that category of not being able to take coworkers. 2 trips per day on deliveries, so just a very limited number of trips and uses of the vehicle. It should just be incidental, is the term that they use in the regulation. All right. Patricia, I'll get back to that question as we get through. I'm going to wrap here in just a second. So seasonal workers, we have to be really careful on workers' compensation, because we can get into a situation that costs us a lot of money and messes up our EMOD, and it's basically because we weren't paying attention. So what do I mean by that? Let's say throughout the course of the work year, the summer, for these seasonal workers, one of those workers gets injured, and it's a serious enough injury that they can't come back to work. So the doctor takes them off of work, and they're off work when your quote-unquote season ends. Everybody goes back to school, and we wrap things up. If we terminate that employee, if we terminate the employee, then that puts us in a tough situation, because we don't have that control over getting the employee back to work. So I would recommend anybody in that situation, don't terminate. So let's keep them as an active employee. And prior to this, we need to be trying to get restrictions. Get the restrictions from the doctor, accommodate those restrictions. But let's say they're off work at the end of the season, and then they go back to the doctor, and the doctor says, "Okay, here's some restrictions. Just a one-handed work, or whatever the restrictions are." what can we do at that point? We can call the employee up and say, hey, we have a job that will meet your restrictions, and bring them back. Now, in many, many cases, the employee's response is going to be, well, I'm in college. I can't come back. And then so we say, so are you telling us that you're quitting your job? And simply by doing that, we want to document all of this. They're telling us, hey, I'm done. We've offered them a position to meet their restrictions, but they voluntarily terminated their employment with us, and they don't even have to do that. But we can go in, and you want to work with your adjuster on this. We can stop paying those additional benefits that might be taking place. So important simple thing. Don't terminate. If somebody's on restrictions at the end of the season, give us a call. Let's come up with a plan so we don't mess up your EMOD. We don't end up costing you a lot of money in the long run. And just in summary, and I know they've got some questions that are out there, but let me just and I'll answer your questions in just a second. Just a reminder, this is a busy time of year to try to get people on. Let's just remember that these folks bring with them some risks, and we need to adequately address them. I'm not saying don't hire seasonals. Most of us couldn't do our tasks if we didn't have those seasonals or volunteers, but let's do a good job in selecting them and managing them. Let's help them be successful by providing them appropriate supervision, appropriate training, the tools to do their job safely and correctly. All those things on child labor laws, I know there may be some questions on that. You can give us a call. You can rewatch the webinar, as well as the Labor Commission can help out on that. All right, let me go back here. Can we waive home water fees and still call them volunteers? That's a really good question. I believe so, but I'm going to punt on that one and tell you to talk to your attorney on that. That might be one that would be a quick one that you could talk to our legal hotline as well if you've got an attorney that's going to charge you to pick up the phone. That is a good question, and I'm not exactly sure on the answer on that one. Now, even so, even if we called them volunteers that get a stipend, because we have volunteer firefighters who may get a small stipend. They get $10 or $15 for every fire call that they go on. We still call them volunteers, and so I'm kind of torn on that. I think you're okay. The money may mean something. We have to be a little careful with the value and time, just because the Affordable Care Act comes in and all of those things. So we don't want them to cross over to be a technical employee. Let's see, there's an offline question. What if the seasonal position has ended? Yeah, that's really the point that we're making is, yeah, even if that position has ended, we don't want to terminate that employee, because it takes away our ability to control a lot about how that work comp claim happens, and then they're really driving the bus at that point. So even though season's over, keep them on as an employee. That does, if they're off work on workers' compensation, they're getting paid. That doesn't mean that it's going to be coming out of your coffers, but in a lot of cases like this, they're back in school, or they're doing another job somewhere else, and it gives us the opportunity to get them back to work, or get them to have some restrictions that will allow us to say we can get you back to work, and then let them voluntarily quit. And that's just a subtle distinction in the workers' compensation rules that allows us to control that claim and stop paying those benefits out, not mess those things up. All right, Patricia, I think we ought to take that one offline and talk about that, because that is a good point to to discuss. All right. Other questions maybe on there. You guys had some good questions today. Trying to see. I don't see any more there. Deb, we'll give you a call and talk about that. I don't see any more questions. Doug, you're more the expert on this subject. Anything you want to add, or Brent, do you have anything to add?
Nothing else to add. Great job, Jason. A lot of good questions and discussion there.
Thank you very much. Statute of limitations on work comp for volunteers. I guess you're talking time. Generally, we look at those if an injury has not been reported, it's 6 months. If it has been reported, it's been reported, and so depending on how it goes. Now, if they don't do anything for 5 years and they come back and say, "Hey, remember that time I tweaked my back?" There's a good chance that even if it's partially our responsibility, it may not all be. Okay, I think we've covered all of our questions there. I know this is a big and challenging subject, but let's start the discussion. Let's just go into it with our eyes open and do a good job bringing these folks on. You know, we'll treat them with respect by giving them the training, give them the supervision that they deserve, and hopefully they'll return that to us as well by doing us a good job. Thank you very much, folks. Everybody have a safe day. Looks like we might have had a question come in there late. Let me